Tonight, we're looking at, as I promised last week, this whole topic of intimacy when it comes to relationships. I thought I was going to be able to do it in one night, but I can't. So we're going to do it this week and next week. And what I want to focus on tonight is a foundational piece to intimacy. And it will, as I teach it, you will kind of have memories of your childhood come to mind, but you will also look at it from being a parent today with your children and what they need in their life in order to develop. And so it comes around this basic need that all of us has, and it goes by different names. Some people talk about bonding, some talk about intimacy, some talk about connecting or attaching, some talk about fitting in. All of those different things are part of this thing that I want to talk about tonight. The idea is become known as attachment theory. And if you're not familiar with that, it has become a fast-growing research area today in the world of psychology, and it's a very important topic for so many parents to understand. And it basically says this: if a child doesn't form a healthy attachment with their parents, they will have lots of trouble later on. And that's what I want to talk about tonight, because that healthy attachment is part of what makes a person capable of healthy intimacy in a relationship. So the idea of attachment, it's kind of a vague term, a little bit tricky to define, but it means this: it's about an emotional connection or emotional attachment to another person. So the original design is that a baby, an infant, creates or finds that connection with mom and dad. And what it means for them to find that connection is that they feel totally safe, they feel totally unconditionally loved and accepted and valued, so that they're able to let down all their walls, wear no mask, because they don't fear rejection, and in that environment, they can connect. And that is essential for a child's healthy development. So another way to say that is a healthy attachment happens when a child's basic physical and emotional needs are met. So we all have a need for acceptance, for respect, for safety, for security. And if those needs are met in a child, they will feel contentment, they will feel secure, they will feel somebody's got my back, and they will feel I can be myself and I can form relationships safely. So healthy attachment is absolutely essential for a child's healthy development. Now, if you think about that, in light of complex trauma, all of a sudden you end up with a problem. Because what happens in complex trauma is you don't attach. You don't form a healthy attachment. So if you look at the 4 environments of complex trauma, in abuse, a child wants to attach to a parent and connect, but they get punished, they get hit, they get verbally abused, and they go, that's not a safe person, I can't connect with them without getting hurt, so I will not connect with them. Or neglect. The child wants to attach or connect with a parent, but the parent doesn't seem to be available. They're not emotionally available, and so what does the child do? It goes, I guess I can't connect with them. Maybe there's something wrong with me. That's why they don't want to connect with me. And so that creates a feeling of, I'm all alone. I feel abandoned. And so now I face the world all by myself. And that's scary, and that's complex trauma, and what they realize that any attempt to connect with parents will result in pain or feelings of abandonment. So it's not safe to connect with anybody because you only get hurt. So I will try and put walls in place to protect my heart, or I'll isolate, or I'll wear masks, and I won't be able to ever truly connect, but I'll at least try to have some fake type of connections. So what you get in a complex trauma home is failure to connect in a healthy way. So another way to understand complex trauma is anybody who wasn't able to connect to mom and dad safely and in a healthy way was traumatized. They did not feel safe, and so they lived with that hanging over them, which kept them on guard, and it kept them on walking on eggshells. Take it another step further. What is really becoming clear through this attachment theory, which is what many of you know by experience, is that we have, every human being has, a deep, powerful, fundamental need to connect. We're driven to feel part of, to belong, to attach, to feel connected to somebody. If we can't do it with a person, we're still driven to connect. And so we will try to connect with two things: an activity or a drug. Now, what happens in addiction? So another way to understand addiction is it's a person's attempt to connect. When you take a drug or when you're involved in an activity, it creates the feelings of connecting to a person. You feel safe. You feel secure. You feel loved. You feel a warmth. All of that is part of connecting with an activity or a chemical. So addiction is you who didn't connect with your parents trying to connect with something and thinking that you found the right thing to connect to, an activity or a drug, but then you found it didn't deliver. It started to backfire and you got hurt. And so it's important to understand that addiction and lack of connection as a child go hand in hand. Addiction is about getting the feelings of connection that you never got in a healthy way from your parents. And that's part of what makes it so seductive. Now, let me just give you an extra piece on this. When I have people come to me with a sex addiction or a porn addiction, what I know inside of me, there's a 99% chance that they never connected in a healthy way with another human being growing up. And as a result of that, it set up this huge thirst to connect, which they try to find through sex. And so it's not until they learn to connect in healthy ways that they'll be able to deal properly with their sex addiction. And for you who have activities and chemicals, it's not until you learn to connect in healthy ways that you'll probably ever be able to get success in your recovery. So addiction, connection is huge. Recovery has to be about learning to attach to healthy people in healthy ways. And I'll get to that more as we go along. Psychologists today use 4 criteria for evaluating if a child has formed a healthy attachment. So you can think of yourself in terms of your children, or you can think of yourself growing up. So number 1, do they see their parents as their anchor, as their secure base is the term that is used. So when life is falling apart out there at school, stress, all of those things, are their parents the people they can go to consistently to find safety, security, and stability? Are their parents their anchor? If not, then there's something that's wrong with the connection to the parents. Secondly, are their parents their safe haven? So if they are very sad, if they have life falling apart and they're grieving, they're hurting, they're struggling, can they go to their parents for comfort, for nurture, for support? If so, they've got a healthy attachment. If not, if they go to other things for comfort and nurture, then they didn't have a healthy attachment. Third thing, how do they respond when they're separated from their parents? Now let me tell you how this works. In a healthy development of a child, when a child cries, as mom responds to the cry and comes in and comforts them, so they get secure base, mom's there for me, she's my anchor. They get safe haven, mom comforts me. And they say, okay, as long as I can see mom, I feel connected. And then they grow a little bit, and mom goes off in another room, and they stay in the living room, and they cry, and mom comes running, and they go, okay, even if I can't see mom, she's still there. She will respond. So I'm still connected. And then mom says you have to go to kindergarten, and they're all panicky. What happens if something goes wrong? And they go to school the first day, and they're a little nervous, and they come home, and mom's standing there waiting for them, and they go, whoo, mom didn't abandon me. Mom's still there, my rock, my anchor, and she's there to comfort me. So what is happening in the development of a child is they are internalizing mom's presence. That mom can be consistently relied on to be there. And that is what a child needs. So, if mom says you're going to go off to day camp this summer, a child that has a healthy attachment says, okay. And they don't go to camp and get homesick because they know mom's there. And if there's trouble, mom will come running for them. But a child that doesn't have that goes off to camp, and they can go through all kinds of emotional torture because they don't have that. And then the fourth thing is proximity maintenance, and that is how close does mom have to be as the child explores their world. So if a child hasn't formed a good attachment, they got to keep hanging on to mom's pant leg. But if they have a good attachment, they can explore a little further out, a little further out, a little further out, because mom is still there. So those are the four things. Now let me apply that in a very important way. Children go through stages of development. So you have the infant, the newborn infant, then they get the toddler stage, then they go off to school, then they go into pre-adolescence, then adolescence. What we're finding is children need to feel attached at every stage of development. So you might say, I really connected with my kids when they were babies. And I say, fantastic. But then you started using drugs when they were in elementary school, and that attachment got broken. That will affect the children. It's good that they had the early attachment. That makes some of the repair easier to do. But if they don't get attachment at every stage, there will be some form of attachment trouble. Some people think, oh, my kids are teenagers now. It won't affect them if we get divorced or if I have an affair. Yes, it will. Children, even at that age, still need a healthy attachment to parents. And so, if you've wounded a child, if you haven't been there for one of the stages, it will cause not a healthy or a secure attachment, but what we refer to as an insecure attachment. Now let me show you how this begins to work itself out in a child's life. And as I go through these characteristics, and there's close to 30, and I'm going to go through them really fast. You might see yourself as a child. You might see your kids today. You might see your brother's children, all of that. But this is how lack of attachment, lack of healthy attachment begins to manifest itself in young children as they grow up. Okay, so number one, shame. A child has been trying to attach with mom and dad and been unsuccessful either through abuse, neglect, or abandonment, or their needs weren't met. The child is concluding, it's my fault. They probably want to attach with me, but I must have something wrong with me that makes them so they don't attach with me. So they start internalizing, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not valuable. And that is probably the deepest, most damaging part of insecure attachment. Second, they grow up with lots of insecurities, more than a child with healthy attachment. And with that, they usually, even with a group of friends, still don't quite feel like they fit in or belong. They always feel outside of things and people groups and friend groups. Next, they have more anxiety than most children. And if you think about a child who's basically saying, I'm all alone in the world, I have to handle life because I can't trust mom and dad, that's a lot of stress on a little child's shoulders, and that creates the anxiety or the constant feeling of being overwhelmed or stressed. Very damaging. Some then go in a whole bunch of different directions. Some become that needy, clingy child. And they're always there wanting your attention, hanging on to you. You go into public and you can't get them off. It's like a leech on your leg because they're just got to have you there. And they can make excessive demands on your time and wanting attention from you. Some become the attention seekers. So they'll go into a new group of people and basically they'll do something to say, yoo-hoo, everybody, look at me. And they try to get that attention. That's their way. Others say, I'm just going to isolate. I'm going to avoid people, relationships. Nobody wants to attach with me, so I'm not even going to try. And they become that invisible lost child. Some kids go, who needs people? I don't care. And they just harden themselves. I don't want to feel anything. So they shut down emotions. They shut down natural empathy. They shut down their conscience because they don't want to feel. And so what we're seeing today is little children with no conscience. Little children already shut down. That's a severe example of not attaching to healthy people. Then some just go beyond that shutdown to angry all the time and rebelling against mom, dad, everybody. They're venting their anger. That's their way. Some go to the extent of being destructive of property. They start damaging people's stuff on their lawn, breaking things. They're venting their anger, their frustration. Some go into self-harm of themselves. Some become bullies. So you can always count on the fact that a bully has attachment disorder, attachment problems. And that's how they express their anger. One that many people, parents, are confused by is the child that becomes what we call ambivalent. So that means one day they love you, the next day they hate you. One day they want to hang out with you, next day they don't want to be within 10 miles of you. One day they say they love you, the next day they say they wish you weren't their parents, they can't stand you. And that can torture you, but that can happen in some of children who don't have a healthy attachment. Then control battles with that child. In their mind, if they let you be in control of their life, you're not going to meet their needs because you haven't so far. So they feel they have to be in control. Well, now you got a battle going on. And so that can happen. And then some children don't even want their parents to give them a hug, or if they're crying, they don't want comfort from their parents. There's just that resistance to any form of tenderness or affection. Some will never look you in the eye. They will avoid eye contact unless they're lying to you. Then they'll look you straight in the eye and tell you a big fat one. But they just don't look at you either because they don't trust you, respect you, or they don't want an attachment. And so looking into your eye might create feelings of attachment. They don't want to go there. Most will become manipulative in some way, either subtly or just very big into being a manipulative kid trying to get their needs met. Next one, they might be struggling with school, with problems, but they won't ask you for your help. And again, it's their way of saying, I can't trust you, or I want to punish you, but they will not ask for your help. Trust issues we talk about, many of them, and this can happen earlier on, they think if I just become more responsible, then mom and dad will want to connect with me. Or if I am a better kid, then mom and dad will want to connect with me. So they'll try to become this perfect child, or they'll even try to be a parent to you and take care of all of your needs. That's their response. Many develop ADHD. And they're just this constant hyper kid. And it's beyond just the high energy that some kids have. This is a kid that can't focus. This is a kid that is just constantly distracted, constant activity. Many of them will lack impulse control. So as soon as they get an idea, they do it without thinking about it, even if it's a bad idea. So that's part of it. And then emotional dysregulation. So if they get angry, it goes through the roof. If they cry, you think the world was ending. They just don't have good skills for regulating their emotions. And then most will have some form of depression. It could be mild, it could be severe, but there will be signs of depression taking place. Others will be spectators on life. They will just watch everybody else play sports or games, but not take part. They don't want to take that risk. And then they will have relationship problems. They might look like they got lots of friends, but there will be the cat fights, there will be the tensions that never get resolved, and more relationship problems will develop. It's interesting that many kids that don't attach well begin stealing. Take that further, when they get to be adults, some people who didn't attach well become hoarders. They attach to objects, possessions. That can be a problem. Many have food issues. Some will hoard food. Some will gorge on food. Some will refuse to eat. Some will eat strange things, hide food. All of those things can happen. Some will tell lies even when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. They just start lying as their way of communicating. And then we talked about the lack of conscience. Most will become very hyper-vigilant. They're always wary of people. They're always checking. That is their survival thing. Some will develop cognitive problems, learning problems. Some will have delays in their learning, so they'll be behind other children. Some will even have speech problems or delays in learning the language and speech. So those can be part of it. Some kids become flirts early on, and they become very inappropriate, affectionately to strangers. That's where they go. Some will never ask you a question. Some will never stop asking you questions. So they don't want your input, or they want constantly to bug you. And then the last one, many become fascinated with the gory, the fire, the ugly stuff, weapons, evil, goth, witchcraft, all of those kind of things can become attractions to the dark side. So that's, some of you are getting depressed, I think, just listening to that. And you go, my kid has no hope. Let me say this. If you get healthy, and that's number 4 here, if you become a safe person, so you're that anchor, that safe refuge for your kids, if you consistently meet their needs, and that means consistent boundaries and enforcement of boundaries, so their kids develop a safety, a security, a stability, you can start to repair a lot of damage. There is hope. I want you to understand that. But I think you can see when a child doesn't connect, their very caregivers, the ones that should be their closest refuge and anchor, now becomes a very confusing person to them. They love them and hate them. They want to be with them, they don't want to be with them. They got all these internal emotions because they got to face life alone. And they start ways of coping, start ways of expressing and venting anger that set them up for problems in adult life. So that might help you understand some of your problems. So next week I'm going to talk more about how do we develop that attachment, that safety, so we can have intimacy. But let me give you an example tonight. When I started into addiction 15 years ago, CNN shortly after had put out a thing that had been done with lab rats. And what they did is they put rats in cages with all these different things that had levers on them. So lever would give them water, lever would give them food, a toy. Then they put THC, cocaine, all of those other drugs. And what they found was the rats would go through the levers, and once they found cocaine or meth, they just keep hitting those levers till they dropped over dead. Okay? So that just said, once you found cocaine and meth, the thrill, the pleasure you got from it surpassed food, water, toys. Okay? Then somebody made an observation. They said, why is it when soldiers go to Afghanistan or Iraq, many of them take drugs? Either to stay awake, either to help their fear, their anxiety, either to help them with their pain, and they take drugs. But when they come back home, many of them never use drugs again and have no craving to use drugs. Many keep on and become terrible addicts. And it's why can some just give it up and some become hopeless addicts? So they did another experiment with rats. And they did this. They said, we're going to have a rat family together. So there'll be mom and dad and who knows how many rat children and aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpas. But they're going to be in a nice big cage. And we're going to have all those things in there with the levers. But we're going to take one rat. And we're going to put it all by itself in its cage. With all the same levers. You want to know what happened? In the family cage where the rats were connected, they had a healthy attachment. They went through the levers. They tried coke. They tried meth. And they never kept using them. They just went back to the food, water, and toy. The rat all by itself that didn't have a connection, that felt all alone, as soon as it found cocaine and meth, it stayed there till it died. You know, I know what came out of that? It's, if you want to deal with addiction, you got to get a connection. Because if you don't have a connection, if you still got all your walls up, if you have no safe people in your life that you're connected, you're going to be like that rat all by itself, and you're just going to go back to using. Because that's your way of surviving and feeling connection. But if you get in a surrogate family with some healthier people and start forming connections, the desire to connect with a chemical begins to disappear. So that is so important. Now let me say this. That is scary. I have had, over the last couple of weeks, quite a few people say to me, where in the world do I find healthy people? There ain't a whole lot of them in our culture today. Not even in churches. And I go, sad to say, you're right. So what you have to be prepared is this. I might have to feel alone for a little while, but I need to start trying to find a few healthy people that I can begin building a relationship with. Because if I don't, it'll be only a matter of time before I go back to the old stuff. And that is scary. So somebody said it this way, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. The other thing, if you're not familiar with Finding Freedom, all of these talks will be posted tomorrow sometime on the website, findingfreedom.ca, under Tim's Talks, and then with that, there will be a PDF of the PowerPoint if you want to have that as well. So I thought tonight, around this attachment connection thing, I just show you that from the Bible. And it's interesting to me because the very first commandment or instruction in the Bible that has to do with relationships says this: it's not good for a man to be alone. Some of you guys go, yep, that's true. A man and a woman are to leave their parents and become one. So that is the very first command regarding relationships. And what really then marks it as being super significant, it's repeated several other times in the Bible, and Jesus repeats it. So, first command, repeated command, that's a clue to say this is important. So that's what I want you to think about tonight. So it's that becoming one is what he is saying. Now, what I'm going to say next might make some of you nervous. Some of you might want to email me, but understand this about me. I basically challenge everything I've ever been taught to say, I don't want to believe it just because I was told it. I want to think it through, and I'm going to pester it with questions and look at it from other angles. So let me give you this. Do you realize in the Bible, it never tells you to have a marriage ceremony. It just tells you to become one. That is the only marriage instruction. Now, some of you are going to get really nervous about that. Because you're saying, what, I can just go jump in bed with everybody? No, you got to understand becoming one, and I'm going to get there. But what I want you to understand is this. When Jesus and God taught stuff, remember the Beatitudes? He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, those that mourn, the meek, hunger. He teaches attitudes. And what God does is this. If you get the attitudes right, the actions will follow. If I just emphasize the actions, you could be doing them for all the wrong reasons. So I'm not going to emphasize the actions, I'm going to emphasize the attitude. And that's what matters. So get that right and the rest will follow. Now let me give you this. In the time after Jesus, when the apostles started churches around the world, I don't know if you realize, but they considered people married if they had a wedding ceremony or if they just were committed to each other without a ceremony. Now that'll blow your top, and some of you won't be able to concentrate on another word I say tonight, because you're going to be chewing on that and saying he's got to be wrong somewhere. But what I want to do is have you think about, what does this become one mean? Now let me give you, there's two parts. You got to leave your father and mother. I could do a whole night on leaving your father and mother, because most people in complex trauma hate their father and mother but never leave them. They still give them all kinds of power in their life, and that messes up their relationship, their marriage. So you got to leave them, undo those apron strings, not depend on them, not go to them as your main source of input and comfort and nurture and all of that. That's leaving. And then the old word was cleaving, and the word was like glue, gorilla glue. You become bond. You adhesive to each other. So what does that mean? First thing I want you to understand is we're created to become one. We're created for connection. We're created for intimacy. That's built into us. That is what God is saying. The most obvious thing that I think comes out of that is we understand becoming one physically. That's called sex. But whenever the Hebrews and the old part of the Bible was written in Hebrew to the Jewish people who are called the Hebrew people, and the way they thought was a command given about physical also applies to emotional and spiritual. So if you're to become one physically, it also means become one emotionally and spiritually. And that's what I want to develop. But let me give you kind of a bigger picture on this. So in the beginning, we're told God created Adam out of this dust. And then Adam, all by himself, God created all these animals that were male and female. And he was told to name all the animals. And after he named them, all of a sudden we're told he was very lonely. I think he felt ripped off, because it's like, hey, all these people have a partner. Where's my partner? So we're told that God put him to sleep, took out his rib. So here's what I want you to understand. Adam was one. God took a rib out and he wasn't one anymore. He now had a hole. And ever since then, he has felt incomplete. And something in him says, I want to return to feeling one again. I want the other part of me to connect with again. And that is what began to develop in him. And so God says, become one. That's physical, but that's not the original intent. And the people would have understood that there was actually an order to the connection part. And the physical was the last part to the process. We get it backwards in our culture. We start with the physical connection and then try to get the others. And then it backfires. And I'll talk about that later. But what did it mean to become one emotionally and spiritually? Number one, it meant openness. What I find about that, I don't know if you remember, but Adam and Eve were then in this garden paradise, the Garden of Eden, and they had all this beautiful stuff. And God said, there's one tree you can't eat. And that tree was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That knowledge of good and evil was actually a figure of speech in that culture, and it meant, I'm smarter than you. And so what God is saying is, you're going to be tempted to think you're smarter than me, and think that you know what's best for you, better than I do, which is going to make you want to go and do your own thing and ignore my advice, which is exactly what they did. And as soon as they did that, we are told a very interesting thing. We are told that up to that time they were buck naked in their birthday suit, but we're told that they felt no shame, no self-consciousness, no need to hide anything. As soon as they thought they were smarter than God and rebelled, all of a sudden they felt shame. And what was their first instinct with shame? I want to hide myself. So they went and they made a little clothes out of fig leaves to try and cover themselves. But what they were really saying is, I don't just want to cover myself physically, I want to hide from you emotionally. And so they started to build walls. That's the shame piece. So a disconnect came into place. So now, what happens in humans is this. When I'm not with somebody, I feel I'm missing something. And I want to find that so I can connect and become one again. But I'm afraid to become one again because I have shame. And so I try to become one by keeping walls in place. And so what God is saying is, His design is that we become one, which means taking the walls down. Which means becoming open again. And as we do that, we begin to feel a connection. A connection that makes us feel whole. It makes us feel alive again. Now, that's again what happens where we get it wrong, the wrong order. If you get the physical intimacy, it creates feelings of emotional and spiritual connection, but you don't even know the person. So God said the way to go about it is connect emotionally, spiritually. And as you connect emotionally and spiritually, you will start to have a desire to connect more and more. And then that'll create a desire to connect physically, which is like the cherry on top of the sundae. But you got to get the sundae first. Okay, next thing. Connecting, becoming one, is being on the same page spiritually. And that, again, that's not a religious thing. I talked about it last week. That means that at the deepest part of each person, they have the same values, the same beliefs, priorities, the same passion, the same direction in their life. So if you hook up with somebody who doesn't match your deepest passions and values, and they're not going in the same direction as you, you're just going to start drifting apart. You're not going to have the deepest connection on the deepest area, so you won't feel connected. Next one, becoming one is not, here we are apart, now we're one, flip a switch. Becoming one is becoming gradually one. It is a process, and it is a slow process. And if you got shame stuff from hiding all your life because of complex trauma, it makes it an even slower process. So God is not saying, go from here to here in one day. He is saying, go from being apart to one, and you'll be spending the rest of your life doing it. Because you'll get to know each other gradually. You'll open up a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more, and you'll keep doing that till the day you die. That is the process. So accept that that's it. Next one, you can't become one with somebody who doesn't accept who you are or respect who you are. Now, I'm not saying accepts that you're a jerk. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying accepts your basic personality. So I'm an introvert. My wife's an extrovert. I love her extroversion most days. Some days I hate it. But I realize I can't have the good parts of her extroversion without the bad parts of her extroversion. She can't change that. That's in the basic wiring. She was born that way. So I either accept it or not. But if I didn't accept that, then I'd have a resentment towards her all the time that she just pissed me off. She is so extroverted. You wouldn't have a becoming one. So becoming one requires acceptance. Then, to become one, you have to trust each other. You can't become one if you don't trust each other. I'm not going to open up to you if you might abuse that information or if you might cheat on me. Trust is part of becoming one. Okay, next one. Every relationship in becoming one is going to have differences of opinion, conflict. Becoming one says, I'm going to work through that conflict. I'm not going to sweep it under the carpet. I'm not going to deny that it's there. I'm going to resolve it in a healthy way. I'm going to address the issues, work through it, and then what that means is there's going to be mutual submission. That means it's not going to be somebody's always right and the other one's always wrong. It's not going to be one person making all the sacrifices and the other person making none. It's going to be a 50-50. We're going to make compromises when we disagree. We're going to figure out, I got to live with your extroversion. I'm an introvert. That means I can't run around to every social thing you go to. I'm going to go to some, so I'll compromise, but I'm going to stay home sometimes while you go out. And so we work that out. And you're doing all of that. You want to know what I love about the fact that God took the rib out of Adam to make Eve? He didn't take a toe. He took the side to make her an equal. And you can't become one unless you're equals. If you're better than the other one, superior, inferior, you will never truly become one. It has to be that of equals. And then, like I said, it's a process that continues and never stops. So that is the very first command that God gives about relationships. And that is what is involved. Hope that kind of makes it make sense to you, because sometimes you read these things in the Bible and you go, leave your father and mother, become one. Okay, that sounds easy. I'll go do that. And then you realize, why are we fighting constantly and thinking about getting a divorce? It's because becoming one is an all-encompassing thing that affects every part of your life. And you have to have certain things in place before it's even possible in the slightest degree. Trust, respect, acceptance, willingness to work through conflict. You get all of that, and then you begin to become one. Now, let me just give you this. Most of us, when we think of connection, we think about emotion. I feel connected. I feel the chemistry. Do you want to know what happens when you develop a connection? You still have times when you feel the emotions of it. But I feel connected to my wife even if I don't have any emotions that day. It's something I've internalized. Something I know she's there. She understands me. I understand her. I can talk to her. I can go to her and I know she'll be ready to listen. There's not a lot of emotions there. You just get this settled belief that's at the core. That's what that becoming one ultimately becomes inside.